Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning and Appeals, I'd like to hereby call this meeting to order. And we have a quorum of ZPA members. And I want to make Mr. Berg aware that we do not have a full complement of ZPA members. And it's my understanding, sir, that you're aware of that fact. Okay. So with that said, I'd like to ask our village clerk, Mrs. Bragg, to please call the roll.
Graziano?
Here.
Kalfs? Here. Jasper?
Here.
Meyer? Here. Corey?
Here. So, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to stand with us as we pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, everyone. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll indulge me for just a few moments, I think some of you are aware that we've had a change. And I first want to begin by expressing my personal thanks to Mayor Koenig for the confidence that he's expressed in me in my new role as the chairman. And you have my commitment that I'm going to do my level best to continue to support the ZPA, our community, and all of you, especially our elected officials. That's my commitment here this evening. Joseph Tournier, as you know, is not here with us tonight. He was formerly the chairman. I do want to publicly say thank you to Joe for all of the great work that he's done over many, many years. He's been nothing but accommodating to yours truly as we've gone through this transition. So I want to publicly say thank you to Joseph. And to our petitioner, Mr. Berg, you have my commitment, you have our commitment that we're going to give you a fair hearing. And we're going to listen thoughtfully to what you have to say. And we're going to reflect deeply on what the request is. We'll take our vote, and then we'll deliver it to the village. And to my fellow board members, as you know well, this is my first time at the wheel. It is not my intention to make any mistakes this evening. However,
What a bet.
should that occur, Mr. Graziano, I will endeavor not to make the same mistake twice. And I thank you in advance for both your support and your understanding of that. Now, what I've been talking with council about, and for those of you that know council, this is Julie Tappendorf. We've been talking about best practices on our ZPA, and that's something that we've been reflecting on quite a bit. We've talked about doing some training, and I think we'll be doing that as we move forward together on the committee. We have a framework that Ms. Tappendorf gave to me, and with your agreement to my fellow committee members, I'd like to trial this tonight. It's not etched in concrete, but I think it might give us a framework in which we can conduct our meetings moving forward, and we'll try it tonight to see how it works. So the idea behind this is that our Director of Community Development, Mr. Simmons, would present an overview of the case. We may, in fact, have some questions for Mr. Simmons. Upon conclusion, we'll ask Mr. Berg to present his petition to all of us, and again, we may have some questions for Mr. Berg. Once we conclude that part of the meeting, we'll ask for public comment. That's for all of you assembled here. You may have noticed there was a sign-in sheet at the back of the room. If you didn't sign it, that's okay. We'll ask you to state your name when we do the public portion and your address if you would like to address us. Once we conclude the public portion, that's when we'll begin our discussion amongst the ZPA members to review basically two issues tonight. One is something around a text amendment, and the other one is a conditional use permit. You'll hear that language as we go through the evening together. Once we get to that point where we vote, we will simply take the roll, we'll take the vote, and we deliver that back to our elected officials, and they become the final arbiter of tonight's discussion. So that's the way it's going to play out, and I want to thank Julie here for her help, because I had the opportunity to meet with her the other day, and she was actually sharing the way the legal proceeding of this meeting is supposed to occur. And in the spirit of being transparent, I do want all of you to know that I was contacted by Mr. Berg electronically. I did agree to speak with him. However, I did subsequently reach out to Mr. Tournier when he was chairman and say that I'd been contacted, and I learned from council that we shouldn't do that. So thank you for your understanding in advance, Mr. Berg, but you have our commitment that we're going to give you a fair hearing this evening, okay? All right. So before we begin, does anyone have any questions before we begin? No, does that sound like a reasonable framework? I think those of you on the committee have the framework. So with that, over to you, Mr. Simmons.
Call to order.
Sorry. You call the case. That would be one. So,
Wait a minute, let me get my pen here.
so I'd like to hereby call village case number 16 ZPA 03001. The petitioner is Pearl Developers. The request is for a zoning text amendment and a conditional use for senior housing, which is going to go on the southwest corner of Three Oaks and Feinberg Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned, the petitioner is requesting this evening a text amendment and a conditional use for a senior housing development. The site is proposed in the area that's shown here. It's on the southwest corner of Three Oaks Road and Feinberg Drive. I'll briefly go over the petition's requests as far as what modifications are proposed to the zoning ordinance, and then some basics of the project. A little history on this project. This has come before this board before. Back in December, there was a hearing to review the original petition for the project, which included a text amendment to modify the code, conditional use for the project with 3 variations, and a comp plan amendment. The recommendation from this board went to the village board in January, where the petitioner proposed some modifications to the project. And upon discussion in the village board meeting, the village board referred the matter back to the ZPA for reconsideration. Due to the modifications that were proposed to the plan, required republication of a public hearing for this project, which delayed the time period for it to come back until this evening. In the meantime, the petitioner revised the petition to change some of the requested actions based off the plan modifications that were also proposed, is now only seeking approval of a text amendment and conditional use for the project. The proposed text amendment is looking at making modifications to the zoning ordinance similar to what was previously proposed, but with some slight modifications to add senior housing land uses to the zoning ordinance. There are 6 areas that the zoning code has proposed be modified, including 3 tables that once you create additional land uses are required to be modified for any new land use that's created. So the proposed modifications are to the table of permitted uses, the definitions within the zoning ordinance, table of parking standards, density requirements, ground floor unit requirements, and also the table of supplemental standards. The table of permitted uses is indicated on this slide. You can see is proposed to add senior housing land uses to the residential land uses category, would be in 5 zoning districts. This is a slight modification from what was proposed in December, where it's still the same zoning districts as proposed, but it's moved to a different section of the table versus before it was in the domiciliary and institutional section of the ordinance, but it's still the proposed same zoning districts as previous. The definition would still include housing in which dwelling units are designed and operated exclusively for persons aged 55 years and older, as the previous proposal indicated, and then is still proposing the same parking requirements of 1 per dwelling unit for a senior housing project. 2 changes from the original petition to this petition speak towards the density requirements. Petitioner is proposing to add a new paragraph in section 1750.021 that would allow the maximum allowable density to be increased above standards set forth in paragraph A of that section, which the table indicated in the slide is within that paragraph for developments that incorporate senior housing, assisted living, or other institutional uses when they're approved as part of a conditional use. Likewise, to section 1750.023, as a modification to the sentence that's currently in that section to add the first part of the proposed sentence on your screen, except for within senior housing, assisted living, or institutional uses when approved as part of a conditional use permit, then no more than 6 dwelling units shall be located on the ground floor in any building. These proposed modifications would allow a project of this type to differ from the proposed the land use table indicated in this slide for density requirements when those units are approved as part of a conditional use. Finally, the last change to the code is to the table of supplemental standards. Again, if by modifying the land use table and parking tables requires amendments to the supplemental standards table as well, and the proposed modifications are similar to what was proposed previously, but moved to a different location of that table. Section 1770-025 of the zoning ordinance establishes standards for which consideration of a text amendment needs to meet. The proposed standards are, the proposed amendment is not detrimental to the orderly development of the village. The amendment shall not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. And the proposed amendment promotes the public interest and not solely the interests of the applicant. For the conditional use, again, the petitioner is seeking approval of a senior housing development. So if the proposed text amendments are approved, it would allow a senior housing development within the existing zoning district for the property under a conditional use permit. The proposal includes a building that is 3 stories in height, would include a total of 62 total units, which is less than 68 previously proposed, with 18 on the ground floor. And the project as currently proposed would comply with the bulk requirements for building setbacks and height established for the property. A brief look at the site plan. As you can see here, the setback along Feinberg Drive is established at 54 feet, which is the narrowest point is kind of by the entrance to the drive-through lane for the post office across the street. The rest of the building would be set back 60 or 70 feet from that right of way. There's one point that pinches down to 20 or 54 feet. Each of these setback areas that are shown here complies with code requirements for building setbacks. Brief view of the elevations. These are very similar to what was presented back in December. There have been some modifications to alter the facade a little bit, but generally the same material palette as previously proposed with fiber cement siding, brick, and stone bases. The zoning ordinance establishes standards for the consideration of a conditional use, which are listed on this slide. In general, the use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health or general welfare. The use will not substantially diminish or impair the values of property within the immediate vicinity, will not impede the normal orderly development of surrounding property, and will not contribute to an overburdening of municipal services, and is consistent with policies and future land use maps and the village comprehensive plan. At this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but I'll also petitioner will be able to provide an overview of the project and requested actions within the petition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. Before we proceed to the petitioner, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Simmons at this time? Okay, so Mr. Berg, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you again tonight. Didn't expect to come back here. Obviously, our plan that we went to village board with was materially, I think, different enough that we need to sort of slow the process down, and I appreciate that. Again, I am David Berg, principal with Pearl. Pearl is an integrated developer, builder, owner of multifamily and single-family properties in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic. I've met most of you before, and we've talked, so I'd like to go through this more quickly this time, not to go into as much depth and hopefully not repeat what you just heard from Mr. Simmons. Again, just some background on the development since it's been a little while. You know the location, 3.9 acres, 62 units, designed for independent seniors 55 and older. Elevator building. There are significant community spaces within the building. You know, a large gathering space, patio. You know, there's a kitchen down there. There's a computer center, library area, fitness room for these residents. What we're trying to do is create a vibrant seniors community. The one-bedroom units, 690 gross, and the two-bedroom apartments, 932 gross square feet. The entire building is about 66,500 square feet. Handicap accessible units, fully handicap accessible, about 10%. All of the units will be adaptable so that seniors can age in place. There will be universal design features throughout the units in the building to help the aging in place process. The entire building is visitable as well. And the building itself is constructed to very high standards in terms of, the framing, the insulation, shingles, every element, the mechanicals, every element of this development is built to a very high standard. We also have energy efficient appliances. The entire building is tested for efficiency. We're also constructing to enterprise green building standards, and we'll have a lot of sustainable building elements within. The development is really designed to do a few things. Number one, it meets the affordable housing plan that the village produced a couple of years ago now, I think, or a year or so, last year, where squarely there's a call for senior housing where it doesn't exist. As well, it meets certain elements within the comprehensive plan. I know that's part of your packet, so I won't go into that detail. Again, we're trying to deliver quality service-enriched community for independent seniors who are living on a fixed income. And even though the restriction and the restrictive covenant will limit the age to 55 and older, in reality, you will have seniors here who skew a little bit older than that. Maybe 80% of the residents will be single widowers. Maybe 15 to 20% of the units may have a couple living in them, living on Social Security income, pension income, limited earned income. And you have a large number of seniors right here who fit that profile. In fact, within the primary market area, which does extend beyond the village limits of it, there's about 2,100 seniors who are qualified to live in this type of development. This demographic is also continuing to grow, and it's expected to increase another almost 12% by 2020 for this market segment. Comparable properties have a high occupancy rate in the area, and we're also designing this to fit harmoniously with the surrounding uses. Obviously, in the business park district and the surrounding area, there's a multitude of uses, but we're working hard to make sure that that happens. The local economic impact of the development, we've talked about this before. There are impact fees, obviously, which we're working on with staff at somewhere in the ballpark of $260,000. Real estate taxes, obviously, we're a tax-paying entity, should average about $100,000, a little bit more during the first 15 years. Construction costs, $11 million in construction costs for the local subs and suppliers. The entire development is going to be at least an $18 million development on that site. We're bringing additional, seniors and residents and family members to this area. They will have residual income. And, obviously for a senior development, and we talked a lot about this the last time, but it doesn't go without saying, but it's a phenomenal area for independent seniors for a lot of different reasons. You've got the parks there, you've got the post office, you've got restaurants, you've got grocery, pharmacy, and other goods and services all within walking distance, and that's significant. We would also be contributing to a budget offset to the village as a stakeholder. That's something that we're talking to staff about as well. we're also willing to donate the excess property to the village. If village staff thinks it makes sense to protect for future land use or to, have a conservation area in that the western side of the site, that's something we're willing to do as well. Development timeline. If this continues to move forward, we would get into design development toward the end of this year, early next year. Construction would start in the fall of 2017. It would be a 10 to 12 month build out. And we are pretty confident, given your market needs, that by the end of 2018, the building would be fully occupied. The site plan. We already talked about this in the previous discussion, but I just want to point out a couple things because there are some differences since the last time we came here. The front yard setback is larger. It's a few feet larger. The side yard setback, that initial entrance off of Feinberg is about 20 inches, 20 feet deeper. The entire footprint is about 1,500 square feet smaller. The parking ratio grew larger. We kept the number of spaces here, even though we reduced the number of units. We think we have more than enough parking based on empirical data that we have. We also extended the buffer, the landscape buffer to the west, looking at this, of that second entrance. So that's more significant as well. The other thing you'll notice here is a path off of Three Oaks to allow for pedestrian access, continuation to get over to Feinberg and to cross over the site. This is another thing that we're discussing with staff. But for now, we're showing a paved sort of right-of-way that would be dedicated within a dedicated easement along sort of the southern tier of the site to connect with the sidewalks back on Feinberg. Three Oaks is it's probably a challenge and a safety issue to extend the sidewalk across the property on Three Oaks. Where the property line is and where the path would go is extremely steep. We can talk about that more as well. That's another difference to the site plan. Just a comparison with the last time we were here. It looks, the building looks similar. The 68 unit is on top. The 62 unit elevation view from Three Oaks is on the bottom. There are some differences. The roof pitch, we took down to from a 812 to a 512. This was in response to some concerns about the height of the building. And there's the view from the back. There's a tower feature that's sort of an accent that's added in the corner there. The old east elevation, the new east elevation. We also removed the vinyl siding, the accents on the sort of upper levels in favor of fiber cement, or some sort of cementitious siding. The old west elevation, the new west elevation. We continue to work on the designs. There's only so much we could do because, the conversation is limited with the village right now. What we've said in our discussions with staff is that, at the point where serious design development will start with the village, and we'll drag the architect and the contractor and others into Brian's office, and we'll sit down and we'll get the feedback that, the village may want to give us, because we don't want to react every time we come to a meeting and work on these features. But we do think it's getting better, and we hope that you would agree with that. It's come a long way since our last meeting. Floor plans, you can't see the detail here, but we've got our community spaces on all 3 floors, responding to village concerns. So we want to continue to work with the village to make sure that we're delivering the best sort of program possible for Cary's seniors. So we reduced the proposal following our last meeting with you to 62 apartments. The idea here was to, decrease the density per acre and also the ground floor dwelling units. Now we have a density per acre that is almost the equivalent of the assisted living down the street. The ground floor dwelling units is actually at 18, is only half of the density of that assisted living facility, but we're able to take both down. Again, we're going to continue to modify the presentation, work on that, make it better. We added the pedestrian access, which we continue to study further with staff, but we're pretty enthusiastic about that. We think it's a great connection point. We enhanced the buffer between the back of the retail and the proposed use. That's important. We've spent a lot of time looking at that, studying that. Where's the finished floor versus, the top of the berm versus, the Douglas fir or whatever kind of evergreen is going to be planted on top of that berm. How tall is it? How many feet a year does it grow to help shield from the back of the retail? And again, willing to donate the excess land to the village to protect for future uses. I would say this. It's a tricky site. We've talked about it for a long time. Last time I was here, there was a lot of discussion about the comprehensive plan, and I would just say that, for all the reasons that this is an inferior commercial site, those are a lot of the reasons why this works so well for this development. I don't think that residual property, it's about an acre, should maybe ever be developed. We're trying very much to respect the berm and the wooded area as protection for the residents of Bright Oaks. A commercial use would really want to front 3 Oaks, not Feinberg Drive. There's really nothing fronting Feinberg Drive. But for a multifamily use like the one we're proposing, it's nice and it's fine to be situated sort of off the main drag. The traffic count is obviously a lot lower on that stretch back there, and that works well for our proposed use. We're also not dumping a lot of additional traffic on the Feinberg. It's obscured by the retail center. It's just, there's no visibility off of 14, again, unless it's a destination user. It's not an appealing site necessarily for a bank, for a restaurant, but for us, it affords some semblance of privacy, which I think is a valuable component as well for this proposed use. So, that's sort of it in a nutshell. I don't want to go necessarily any deeper than that at this point. I know, this is not new to the board, but I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berg. So before we conclude this part, does anyone on this board have questions for Mr. Berg?
I just had one question on the site plan. You, in going over, you said the second entrance on the back end there, that is at grade with the parking lot or service entrance to the rear. That's going to be an open driveway, not just an emergency access?
Just want to make sure I understand your question. The second drive, you're saying over here? Is that at grade?
I'm asking if that's an open entrance that will be accessible at all times.
Yes, it will be open and accessible at all times. Just a second means of ingress and egress.
Okay.
Sorry.
Changing your roof, in changing your roof pitch, how much did that lower the building?
The midpoint came down from 40 feet to 36 feet 9 inches.
So 3 feet?
Yep, 3 feet 3 inches. I think the limit in that district is 50, maybe.
Okay. And is the rooftop then visible from Route 14?
Is the rooftop visible from 14? That's a good question.
Or even the top floor?
The top floor, yeah, the rooftop actually should be, it probably is visible from 14,
Okay,
the top floor, yeah.
and the top floor as well? So if you had a unit on the top floor, you'd be able to see out over the, you'd be looking at the top of the commercial buildings and out onto Route 14?
Yeah, I'm not sure, you would be partially obscured from that. We're talking about 10-foot floors, you'd be partially obscured. I don't think you'd have a full view on the top floor, but yes, you would be up, you would be at least at the rooftop of the retail. But the grade changes as well, so you're already starting, 5 foot below, at least 5 feet below where that is.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. You're changing the, you're excavating is what you're saying?
Well, the initial civil work that was done pegged the finished floor at about 5 feet below where the retail sits. So it's not quite at the same level. So that's our starting point. When you get up to the third floor, yes, you would be looking at the rooftop. You'd be looking at the top of the retail, most likely.
Are you excavating?
We're not excavating. No, that's something that we had explored before, but we're not going to do that. It's not, the site doesn't really lend itself to that, and it's not necessary here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other questions for Mr. Berg? So, Mr. Berg, I do have a question. You might recall from your last presentation on December the 10th, we did talk a little bit about whether or not the plan, and I know it's been revised now, has been reviewed by the fire department. Were you able to review this revised plan with them, or is it just too premature at this time?
Yeah, I defer to staff for
Yeah,
that.
we originally presented the first proposal to the fire department. They reviewed it, and they had no concerns as far as how the project was designed. And this plan is still in line with the original plan from that standpoint.
Okay, thank you very much. So unless there's any other questions from the zoning board, what we'll do now, Mr. Berg, with your agreement, is that we typically open this portion of our meeting up to the public. And for those of you that are seated out here, you're welcome to express your comments. Please approach the microphone. And what we would ask of each of you is simply state your name and your local address here for the record. That's part of our process. So whoever would like to go first, you're welcome. Sir.
Name is Jim Remza. I live at 9 Tamarack Court, Cary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, board members. This is my first meeting on this topic, so I just had a few questions as I see the presentation. Maybe I missed it in prior presentations, but I'm wondering, is this a brick veneer building or is it a non-combustible building? Meaning brick on block, or is it brick on frame?
We can handle this a couple of different ways. We have both Mr. Simmons here that would have some visibility on that, or we have the petitioner here. Either way you would like to address that.
You have the petitioner provide those.
Yeah. Mr. Burke?
The basic construction of the building?
Yeah, it's a wood frame
Wood frame building?
It's got its fire zones, it's sprinkled, it's got its landing areas, but it's wood frame.
Okay, that answers one of my questions. I was wondering about the fire protection. It's going to be sprinklered and have fire detectors in the building and things like that? Do you know how close the fire hydrants are to the building? But I presume if it ran by the fire department, they would have asked that question. Okay. Okay, that's all the questions I have. I've got one question. I've been to other zoning board meetings, and Joe Turnier
Yes.
was the chairman.
Yes.
Just wondering, I didn't read or anything here, what happened to Mr.
Okay,
Turnier?
so you may have missed the beginning of our meeting, so I'll explain that recently Joe and the mayor had a discussion. Joe has resigned his position as the chairman of this committee. The mayor has approached me about being the new chairman, of which I've accepted, and we're now moving forward together as a new zoning board. And we have some openings, and so if there's anyone interested in our audience tonight, we have some openings on this zoning board.
So Joe resigned on his own for his own reasons?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
And I have spoken to him, and he's, for the record, sir, he's been very helpful to yours truly. He's done great work over many years here.
Is he going to continue on the board?
It's not my understanding that that's what he's going to do.
Okay. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Joyce Vernicus, and I live at 959 Parma Drive here in Cary. I've lived in Cary for 58-plus years. And I came this evening to strongly urge you to grant the variances requested by Pearl to allow the construction of this senior affordable housing complex. There is a great need for this type of housing in Cary. Presently, when we can no longer either afford to live in our own homes or to care for our own homes, we have no choice. It's either go into assisted living or stay in our homes. And this type of a complex would certainly fill a void. Our surrounding communities already have this type of housing available to their citizens. And I'm just asking that you please don't force us to move out of the community that we've contributed to over the years and lived for such a long time. We don't want to go anywhere else. We want to stay in Cary, and this would be a great opportunity for us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Frank.
Frank Stuckerberg. I got a couple of, I live at 832 Virginia, back in Sienna Point in Cary. I've got a couple of questions for you as far as safety compliance goes. One is, how many handicap parking spaces are going to be allowed? And how many spaces are going to be allowed per unit as far as parking facility for a car for the private people? And number three is that if you do have a sprinkler alarm system and the alarms go off, are the doors going to automatically shut at all entrances such that it prevents smoke and fire inhibiting another area, and to be able to still let the people get out, and to be able to make sure that there's also preventable, it's like in a hospital when a fire breaks out, the doors automatically go shut automatically, and then you got ways to get out and be directed.
Okay.
I appreciate the questions. The first question, I think there's the site plan right there. There's four handicap spaces on the site plan. In terms of overall parking, there's 1.26 spaces for every apartment, which frankly is a lot more than we need, including staff, including family members. We've got 1.26 to 1. As to your third question, with respect to design, code, fire safety, as we get into the design development, we'll determine exactly what's needed. We do have fire separation throughout the building. I don't know how long, in terms of having doors that shut automatically, oftentimes we'd see that on a much longer corridor, for example, but we will be in full compliance with the code and the regulations from a design standpoint when you're considering fire safety.
I think in the Village Cary code, I think it requires that there is one handicap parking space for every 15 parking cars. So that would have to be, if you say there's 4 of them or something else like that, I think that might have to be increased a little bit on this when you get into the final drawing stages on this. And I think you'd have to have the zoning board look at this as well as the trustees to find out, because in a normal parking spot, it is 1 handicap parking space for every 15 cars.
I can address that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
It's one per 25,
1 for 45?
1 for 25
1
for the
for
first
25,
100,
okay.
and then 2 for each 100 thereafter.
Right.
So the 4 handicap
It's compliant.
meets the code because it's 1 per 25, and he's got 62 parking spaces.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you for your questions, and Member Graziano, thank you for your expertise, as usual.
That's
Appreciate
good.
it.
I'm a traffic engineer.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments that they would like to review with us? Okay, I think I should state for the record, everyone, that we did receive some letters that are part of our package that we all received here as part of the zoning board. Every one that I have seen, unless there's some new ones, Mr. Simmons, have been in the affirmative to support the senior citizen development, the ones that I've seen anyway. So what we do now, folks, is that we close the public portion of our meeting. This is the time that I'm going to follow kind of what council has given to me, that there's theoretically some cross-examination, but I'm not sure there's going to be any of that this evening. That may occur probably in an appeals process, but not tonight's meeting. So what I'd like to propose now to our board members here is that it was proposed to me that we could entertain the motions collectively, or would you like to review them individually? I'm very flexible with our process here. I'll open it up to your comments about how you would like to proceed in reviewing the applicant's petition.
Well, I think we should discuss text amendment first, and then the specific project and conditional use.
Okay,
And vote on
Assuming-
them separately.
okay, so I think I understand you'd like to review the text amendments first, and would you like to go through the text amendments individually, or would you like to go through them collectively as proposed by Mr. Simmons?
Well, I think they're all tied together,
I
so we
think
can
that's
discuss
correct.
them as a group.
All right, so how about if we do this? How about if I propose a motion? So just bear with me.
Page 8.
I'm sorry?
Page 8.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of the text amendments to add regulations to senior housing to the zoning ordinance, and we'll come back to the conditional use as our next question, okay? So I will make the motion, and I will...
No, you can't make the motion.
I'm sorry, I will...
I will make the motion.
Thank you. And may I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion?
On page 6 of the packet in which we received, staff talks about the fact that the ground floor unit requirement doesn't necessarily reflect the density and unit count of buildings of this type, that it was more focused towards single-family attached dwellings, townhomes and such. If we're rewriting a text amendment, why wasn't that issue addressed and placed within the text amendment? That we, for the institutional slash senior housing situations that we, have within the code, an acceptable density requirement, rather than having to, look at it on a conditional use basis every time it comes up.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to ask Mr. Simmons to address that.
As far as looking at the proposed language that's modified, the second paragraph on this page is the section in question as far as the number of units on the ground floor. Right now, the code reads that no more than 6 dwelling units shall be located on the ground floor in any building. So it's the second half of this paragraph. What is being proposed as far as this petition is to add the first part of that paragraph shown to allow for, under a conditional use approval process, which would come before this board for review, that there would be the density or proposed units on the ground floor would be reviewed as part of that process. So it wouldn't establish specifically a requirement in the code as far as how many units may be on the ground floor of a proposed structure, but allow flexibility within the code for reviewing potential projects as they were to come forward. The proposed project here, as mentioned, has 18 units that would be on the ground floor. Similar project that is within the community currently for the Three Oaks Assisted Living Facility. The approvals for that project were very similar in this case, that the density of that project was approved as part of a conditional use permit. There was no variation called out as far as the number of units on the ground floor or the number of units per acre in that development. So what this proposal is doing is kind of codifying that approval process for these types of projects so that they could be reviewed on a case-by-case basis as far as what is proposed, so that they wouldn't be limited to the 6 dwelling units, which I believe is more towards an attached housing project, a townhouse project, but would allow some flexibility in the code to allow different types of building designs that would have greater than 6 units on the ground floor.
However, still anything over 6 would then require conditional use. So if we were to, build another senior housing project or other kind of institutional project, we would have to come before this board. If everything else panned out,
Correct.
this one requirement would require them to come before the board.
Not
No.
even looking at the land use table as far as the proposed zoning districts that the use can go into, any senior housing project that would be a multifamily housing project in nature would require to come before this board. It would not be a permitted use within a zoning district by right. So it would have to go through
Sorry.
for this,
Yep.
for conditional use permit, and then
Yep.
that density and then the number of units on the ground
So
floor.
every unit's going to have to come before us, or every building is going to have to come before us anyway.
Correct. Every multifamily
Yeah.
senior housing project, yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Any other questions, Patrick?
No, but I will state that I would think that, if something was set up for townhomes and the likes of that, and we're talking about institutional, that I would think that we'd want to even address that to, show potential developers what our expectations are within the code. Rather than, giving them the idea that they can do whatever they wish. Kind of like a poker game, come in with their first bid. In my feeling that should have been addressed, but
Do you want to amend the amendment, or are you comfortable with the way it's stated?
well, I'm not a developer or an engineer, or and I wouldn't know what would be close to normal. I'm sure 18 is not close to normal. That's still a lot for this particular property. So if staff has any recommendations, what they were, what their normal expectation for an institutional property would be, we could consider that and adjust the text amendment accordingly. If you're not comfortable within doing that, then we just leave it the way it is and go forward according to plan.
Yeah, I mean, from a speculative standpoint, as far as identifying what type of, density unit would be out there, it depends on the project type as far as that's being proposed. So if we're speaking specifically towards the number of units on the ground floor, but with it being limited to 6, now, it's hard to establish a number for what would be acceptable. Because in this case, the proposal is for 18 units, but that is half of what the other facility that is on the corner of Three Oaks and Silver Lake Road has. They have 35 units on the ground floor. So,
On larger property.
a slightly larger property, yes. But from that standpoint, they do have more units that are on the ground floor, and that project was approved. So we've kind of established from a village standpoint on that site that was acceptable. Looking at conditions at this site, is an 18-unit ground floor acceptable as well. It would be looking at overall the bulk requirements within the ordinance for a project, how closely it matches the intent of the zoning code and the ordinance for development. As new projects would come forward, we review that, and if a proposal had vastly exceeded what density would be allowed, likely would not be something that would be supported by zoning board or staff or the village board for that matter.
Okay,
Comfortable?
pardon?
You comfortable?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Other questions from members of this board? All right, then, what I'd like to propose, just from a break from past pattern of practice, I'd like for Mr. Simmons to restate exactly what it is we're going to vote on, so there's zero confusion, because there's a number of different conditions around these text amendments. I believe there's 6 of them.
Just to clarify, the conditions will be to the conditional use?
Correct.
Not to the text amendments?
Thank you, but there are,
But there are multiple text amendments?
correct. Thank you for the clarification, Counsel. I appreciate it. So I think that's the point of this, is that, so there's zero confusion about what we're voting on now. I'd like to go back through each of these items, so there's no confusion amongst the board members of what it is we're voting on.
Sure. There are 6 sections of the code that are proposed to be amended. As this table indicates, the first is the table of permitted uses, which is in 1720-030 of the zoning ordinance. That would be adding senior housing as a land use type, as a conditional use in the R3, B1, B3R, B4, and BP districts. Likewise, it'll be adding a definition for senior housing that would read multifamily housing in which dwelling units are designed and operated exclusively for persons aged 55 years or older. We'll be adding a section for the table of parking standards for adding senior housing as the land use in that table with a parking requirement of 1 space per dwelling unit. We'll be modifying the section 1750.021, adding a new paragraph D. To read the maximum allowable density may be increased above the standards set forth in paragraph A for developments which incorporate senior housing, assisted living, or other institutional uses when approved as part of a conditional use permit. The table on this slide shows the table that's standards that are set forth in paragraph A. Another amendment is to amend section 1750.023 to read as follows: except for within senior housing, assisted living, or other institutional uses when approved as part of a conditional use permit, no more than 6 dwelling units shall be located on the ground floor in any building. Finally, the final amendment is to amend the table of supplemental standards within section 1750 of the ordinance, again adding a senior housing land use to this table with the modifications as proposed in this slide. That would be the 6 areas of the code that are proposed to be amended as part of the text amendment.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, there's a lot there. We previously asked for a motion. Mr. Graziano granted it. It was seconded by Ms. Kelps. And the way this will work now is that if you're in agreement, you'll vote yes. And if you're in disagreement, obviously you vote no. So the way this works, Mr. Berg, is that for this to pass this committee, just to remind you, you need 4 to 1 to bring it to approval. You do not have a full complement of ZPA members here this evening, and I just want to remind you of that fact. Okay, you're comfortable with that? Okay. So unless there's any discussion, we will take the roll on this particular request.
Graziano?
Yes.
Kelps? Yes. Meyer?
Yes.
Jasper?
Yes.
Corey?
Yes. So, Mr. Berg, you have affirmative review of the text amendments. And now we're going to proceed into the conditional use. And so we're going to go through the same procedure. I'm going to request of my colleagues here to entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees a conditional use of senior housing at the property located at the southwest corner of Three Oaks and Feinberg Drive, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report.
So move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Well, discussion, comment, whatever. My objection from the first time around, while less, still exists. And I think that, while yes, this property has not been used and it's very hard to find a use for, I'm not totally convinced, and I'm looking for people to convince me that it's the best use. One of my biggest problems is, again, the height of the building, both from Three Oaks. I think from standing at Three Oaks, it will end up standing out to all the other buildings within the area. It'll almost be like a monument, and then the fact that it is noticeable from, Route 14, again, while it isn't quite spot zoning within the text amendment, it is still kind of, within that qualification. One of the questions I had was when we were showing the design, there was landscaping in front of the building facing Three Oaks Road. What are those? And I know that's not within our bailiwick here, but it's just kind of curious as to what those are, because they do have the potential of breaking up the sight line.
The plan at this point does not have the detail as far as the type of plantings proposed, but they would be more shade trees that would be approved under the zoning ordinance, so that you would have some taller trees that would be growing in that portion over time that would break up the massing of the structure.
Okay?
And Patrick, I do want to comment a little bit on your comment. We've sat together on this committee for a number of years, and I'm recalling our December the 10th meeting when former Mayor Lamal was here, and he had informed me at that time that this piece of land has sat vacant for over 25 years. And I think, there's an opportunity here for our community that we haven't had in the past. I've sat with yourself for over 5 years, I'm certain of that. I've been on the committee for 10 years, and I don't recall any petitioner coming forward to present any type of opportunity to this particular parcel. So I think it is a unique opportunity for the community.
That within itself isn't a reason in which to put the next best thing there.
Thank you.
One other item just to note as well, as far as the height of the structure, just from a zoning standpoint, the proposed structure is just under 37 feet in height. The maximum height for the zoning district that can be built by right without requiring a variance or relief from the zoning ordinance is up to 50 feet. So somebody could come in theoretically and build an office building on the property that would comply with code and could be another 14 feet taller than the proposed structure, just for information.
Very good.
Thank you. So any other questions from yourself, Patrick?
No.
My only problem with the conditions that we have here is number 5, publicly accessible pedestrian path shall be installed along the south property line connecting to the right-of-way for both Three Oaks Road and Feinberg Drive. I think when we were talking about a publicly accessible path along Three Oaks Road, that meant along Three Oaks Road, not going some, whatever that distance is, 600 feet from Three Oaks to Feinberg, and then if you wanted to continue, you cut across the parking lot for the post office and then continue on your way. I would still like staff to investigate some more direct connection from the west end of the property to the east end of the property, being Feinberg Drive. So I don't want condition number 5 to be cut in stone here, or in concrete, if you will, and saying this is the only thing that he has to do, that the developer has to do. There's a parking lot right behind him that can be walked upon, so that particular sidewalk, I don't think really adds anything to the accessibility. But
So,
that being said, I just would like staff to continue to investigate a more direct pedestrian accessible route. And I understand there's slope problems and that there, but as we talked about the last time, looking at the pictures, there is a worn path in the existing parkway area, so people are finding their way through there. And as Frank mentioned, maybe some way other than having a retaining wall with a pedestrian fence on top of it to keep it from falling off. That's my only
if I can offer a suggestion, then, Mr. Graziano, that would you be amenable to a 5A or number 7 around this, that the staff would further review this area in terms of you move the motion and we can amend it to include a 5A or a number 7?
How about if we just amend number 5 to say a publicly accessible pedestrian path shall be installed
Connecting the right way.
connecting, well, however we word it so it doesn't say along the south edge of the property.
Could be, just a suggestion might be a publicly accessible pedestrian path shall be installed connecting the right-of-way for both Three Oaks Road and Feinberg Drive. And it wouldn't call out the south property line, but it would provide some way to connect from point A to point B. And then we can look to see if there are, other feasible options for, moving that further off the south property line.
Yeah, that's fine, as long as we all understand what we're saying.
Okay, we're going to recap this in just a moment, but
Okay.
before we begin, Holly, you would second this. Are you comfortable with the change of the
Yes,
language?
absolutely, yeah.
Okay. All right, so what we're going to try to do here again, everyone, is there more discussion around this particular item? Jennifer? No? All right, so what I'm going to ask Brian to do once again, just for all of our benefit, is we're going to recap the conditional use request. So there is zero confusion. We're going to include the new language, and then we'll take the vote, okay? So Brian, over to you.
So the requested action is to approve a conditional use for a senior housing development on the subject property, subject to the 6 conditions in the staff report, which consist of conditional use granted to Pearl Developers LLC for the property located on the southwest corner of Three Oaks Road and Feinberg Drive. 2, the proposed improvements shall substantially conform to the plans and exhibits as part of this petition, except as they may be changed to conform to village codes and all conditions of approval. Item 3, the subject development shall be limited to a total of 62 units with a maximum of 18 units on the ground floor. Condition 4 is prior to the issuance of a building permit, a plat of subdivision shall be submitted for review and approval, which consolidates the 2 parcels which comprise the property. The plat shall be recorded prior to the issuance of an occupancy permit. Condition 5, as amended, would be a publicly accessible pedestrian path shall be installed connecting to the right-of-way for both Three Oaks Road and Feinberg Drive. And condition 6 is a stormwater plan will be reviewed and approved for location and capacity.
Thank you very much. Is that acceptable to all of you in terms of the change of the language? Okay, so once again, we'll call the roll, please.
Kelps? Yes. Graziano?
Yes,
Jasper?
With the final comment that Brian made, I'm going to vote yes.
Meyer,
Yes.
Corey.
Yes. So, Mr. Berg, you have a positive recommendation from the Zoning, Planning, and Appeals Committee. I think you know our process now, that you need to still coordinate with Mr. Simmons, and then he'll give you the date for addressing the village trustees, and I'm not exactly sure when that will be.
Tentatively scheduled for April 5th.
So this will close our meeting, but before we close, I should ask the members, first of all, thank you very much for your patience with me as I stopped and stuttered a few times here. Council, thank you for keeping me on the straight and narrow. Before we conclude, does anyone have any other questions? All right, so I seek a motion to adjourn our meeting.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Well done. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.